Okay, so you guys have sent in some really interesting stuff recently about all the changes happening in federal education policy.
Yeah.
And what we thought we'd do today is kind of like take a deep dive into this stuff,
Right.
really pull out what's important, and really give you some key takeaways and
Yeah.
some helpful info so you can navigate this stuff.
Exactly.
We're going to be focusing on this blog post by Dr. Howie Knoff
Mm-hmm.
from March 22nd, 2025.
Okay.
And it looks like he's responding to these changes that are coming down the pipe federally.
Fair.
And so we're going to kind of unpack that and see what he has to say for educational leaders about how to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, this document really gets to the heart of what Dr. Knopf is suggesting, and he's basing it on what K-12 Dive called the 10 Trump changes that education leaders need to know about.
Oh, wow.
This was back on March 21st, so just the day before his blog post.
Okay.
And this is a pretty comprehensive list.
Wow. So, like, what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, there are potential workforce reductions at the U.S. Department of Education. And that could impact things like the NAEP.
Yeah, the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Right, exactly. The nationwide checkup on student learning.
Right.
There's even talk of some of those assessments maybe being canceled.
Oh, wow.
And then you've got policy shifts on things like transgender student sports.
Yeah.
And a huge emphasis on expanding school choice.
So it's like a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of like all coming at once.
Yeah, a lot of changes happening at the same time.
Yeah, and the summary also mentions like downsizing the Office for Civil Rights and some changes in how the administration is looking at DEI practices.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, exactly. And even like starting an anti-DEI website.
Right. It's a pretty significant shift in direction.
So this is, this is a lot to process for people who are working in these institutions.
It is. It's a lot to take in. And what's really interesting is, if you look at the big picture, all of these individual changes are kind of culminating in this executive order from March 20th.
Right.
Which is directing the Secretary of Education to just go ahead and close the entire Department of Education.
Wow.
Yeah, big move, right? But, Dr. Knopf, he points out that the the Elementary and Secondary Education Act,
Right.
that already says that states have authority over education.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like it's already set up in a way.
In a way, yeah. The legal foundation was already there
Yeah.
for a lot of state control.
So even though you see these headlines that are talking about, like this massive federal overhaul,
Right.
it sounds like the legal framework was already kind of recognizing that states had the primary role.
Yeah, exactly. And the summary makes it clear that even though the Department of Education might be shrinking, they still want to keep supporting students.
Okay.
So things like student loans and Pell Grants
Yeah.
and funding for students with disabilities.
It sounds like those are still in the plan. It's just that they're going to be handled by different agencies.
Right, exactly. So instead of the Department of Education, you might see the Small Business Administration handling student loans, or the Department of Health and Human Services taking care of funding for students with disabilities.
Okay, so the mechanisms are shifting, but they're not necessarily disappearing.
Right. The White House is saying they want to make the Department of Education a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But to actually get rid of it completely, that would take congressional approval.
Right.
And this summary even says there's already legislation to do just that.
Oh, wow.
So this is something that's still unfolding.
Right.
We don't know exactly how it's going to play out yet.
Right. And that's kind of the perfect setup for talking about what Dr. Knopf is proposing, because his blog post really seems to be about helping schools and, educational agencies figure out how to deal with all this change.
Yeah, he's coming at it from a really interesting perspective.
So he's the president of Project Achieve Education Solutions. And his main message seems to be about being proactive.
Yeah.
Like, he really believes that schools need to be working to protect what they're already doing well and even build on those successes.
That's a great way to put it.
In light of these policy changes. So it's not about just reacting to what's happening. It's about getting ahead of it.
Exactly. He wants schools to be in the driver's seat,
Right.
shaping their own future.
Exactly. And he boils all of his advice down to 3 main areas.
Okay.
He says it's really important to adopt some specific leadership strategies. You need to take a close look at the school's mission statement, maybe adjust it,
Yeah.
and then really create a solid public relations plan.
So he's saying that if schools can focus on those 3 things, they'll be able to not only survive these changes, but actually come out stronger on the other side.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. Yeah, like this isn't just about holding on, it's about thriving.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's start with those leadership strategies because the summary lists 8 future-proof strategies that Dr. Knopf is proposing.
Wow, 8. That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but they're all really interesting. The first one is about the school's mission,
Okay.
its vision, and its core values.
So kind of like the foundation of everything.
Right, exactly. And he says it's so important to make sure that everyone knows why the school exists, like
Yeah.
what its purpose is,
Right.
and that everybody is on board with that. And then from there, he says, all the decisions that the school makes
Right.
about, their strategy, their staffing, their funding, their instruction, like all of that
All
needs
right.
to be aligned with those core principles.
So you're saying that everything the school does should flow from that mission.
Exactly. And then on top of that, he says it's really important to actively communicate that identity
Okay.
to everybody, like celebrate it, be proud of it, and get other people excited about it.
That makes sense because if you can get people to rally around that shared mission,
Right.
then you're going to get more support.
Exactly. And that support is going to be really crucial when things get tough.
Especially when you've got all these external changes happening.
Exactly. Yeah. When things are unpredictable outside, having that strong internal foundation is
Yeah.
going to be really, really important.
I can see how that would provide a sense of stability for everybody.
Right. For the students, for the
so-
staff, for the community.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder of who they are and what they're all about.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's the first strategy.
Okay.
The second one is about streamlining the school systems.
Okay. So making things more efficient.
Right. And he's talking about both the administrative side and the organizational side.
Mm-hmm.
So taking a hard look at the way things are structured, identifying anything that's redundant or inefficient, and just getting rid of it.
Yeah.
And then he talks about establishing clear protocols
Okay.
for the essential functions. So like managing the budget, developing the curriculum, handling public relations.
Yeah. All the key stuff.
Exactly. And he also says it's really important to write things down.
Document things.
Yeah, document everything so that when staff members leave, that important institutional knowledge
Right.
doesn't just walk out the door with them.
That's such a good point because turnover is always a challenge in education.
Absolutely. And so having those systems in place
Yeah.
really helps to create stability and continuity.
It's about building a system that can adapt and keep going no matter who's in what position.
Exactly. And that's so important when you're facing all of this uncertainty.
Yeah, you want to be able to roll with the punches.
Okay, so we've got a strong foundation with the mission.
Yeah.
We've streamlined our system, so we're running efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
What's the third strategy?
The third one focuses on institutional knowledge and governance.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Well, he talks about having one central place for all the key information about strategic planning and best practices for teaching.
Okay.
But then at the same time, he says it's really important to give school-level teams the power to make decisions in areas like curriculum development and professional learning.
So it's a balance between having that central knowledge base
Right.
and then also empowering the people on the ground.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes making sure that all those governance documents are controlled locally.
Yeah.
And that there are clear lines of communication, especially when things are changing quickly or if there's a crisis.
So it's about being prepared for anything.
Yeah, having those systems in place so you can respond effectively.
So it sounds like this is really about building capacity within the school
Right.
and distributing leadership so that you're not just relying on one or two people at the top.
Exactly. It's about creating a more resilient structure.
Yeah, where everyone has a role to play and everyone feels empowered.
And when you give people that sense of ownership,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be more invested in the school's success.
Right. It's like building a team instead of just having a hierarchy.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, so that's 3 strategies down.
Okay, what's next?
The fourth one is all about evidence-based practices.
Okay, so focusing on what actually works.
Exactly. He says that schools need to be really intentional about using instructional and intervention methods that have a proven track record of success.
So not just following the latest fad.
Right, exactly. It's about looking at the data and seeing what actually leads to better outcomes for students, both academically and socially and emotionally.
That's a really important point because sometimes those social and emotional skills can be just as important as the academic stuff.
Absolutely. And he also emphasizes the importance of documenting the results
Okay.
of those evidence-based practices.
So showing that they're actually making a difference.
Exactly. And then sharing those successful strategies with other schools.
Oh.
So it's like spreading the knowledge.
Yeah, collaboration.
Yeah. And he says you also need to have a plan for how to sustain those programs over time.
So it's not just a one-off thing.
Right. It's about making those positive changes a permanent part of the school culture.
And if you can show that you're getting good results,
Yeah.
then that's going to make it easier to get funding and support.
Right, exactly. Because you're not just saying, trust us, this works. You're saying, look, here's the data.
Yeah.
And that's a much more powerful argument.
Especially when you've got all these funding changes happening.
Right, exactly. Okay, so strategy number 5 is all about professional development.
Okay, keeping the teachers and staff up to date.
Exactly. And he suggests using an evidence-based approach to professional development.
Okay.
So again, it's about looking at what actually works. And he talks about moving from just acquiring new knowledge to actually applying it in the classroom.
So making it practical.
Exactly. And then ultimately helping teachers to feel confident
Yeah.
in those new skills.
That's so important because if teachers don't feel confident,
Right.
they're not going to use those new strategies.
Exactly. And he also highlights the importance of providing training that helps teachers to be more flexible and adaptable, because that's going to be essential in this ever-changing environment.
Yeah, with all these changes coming down the pipe.
And then he talks about creating mentorship opportunities for staff
Mm-hmm.
and developing teacher leadership within the school.
So building that capacity from within.
Exactly. And when you invest in your staff like that,
Yeah.
it shows them that you value them and that you're committed to their growth.
And that can go a long way in terms of morale.
Absolutely. And it also helps to create a more stable and resilient school.
Yeah, because you've got all these talented people
Mm-hmm.
who are ready to step up and lead.
Okay, so that's 5 strategies down. We're making good progress.
Okay, 3 more to go.
Strategy number 6 is all about strengthening parent and community engagement.
Okay, so building those connections outside the school walls.
Exactly. He says you need to have a really comprehensive communication plan to keep everybody informed about what's going on at the school.
So regular updates and communication.
Yeah, and not just one-way communication. Yeah. He really stresses the importance of listening to parents and community members, getting their feedback, taking their concerns seriously.
So it's about building a two-way dialogue.
Exactly. And he says schools need to position themselves as a reliable and trusted source of information.
Especially in today's world where there's so much misinformation out there.
Right, exactly. And when you build that trust with the community, they're going to be much more likely to support the school.
And they're going to be more likely to advocate for the school.
Right, exactly, when those tough decisions have to be made.
Yeah, they're going to have your back.
Okay, so that's engagement strategy number 6.
Okay, what's next?
The 7th one is about building strong local partnerships.
Okay, so working with other organizations in the community.
Exactly. And he talks about working with the district leadership, establishing parent and community advisory groups.
Okay.
So that their voices are heard and engaging with local businesses to see if there are any potential collaborations. And connecting with community organizations to leverage their resources and expertise.
So it's about creating this network of support.
Exactly. And the idea is that by building these strong local connections, the school becomes less dependent on federal or state structures.
Which is really important given all the changes that are happening at those levels.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about creating a safety net so that the school can still thrive even if those external supports are reduced or disappear.
And those local partnerships can bring so much to the table. They can provide resources, connections, expertise.
Right, and they can also help the school to be more responsive to the specific needs of the community.
Exactly, because those local partners are the ones who are closest to the ground.
Right, they understand the context in a way that someone in Washington, D.C. might not.
Exactly. Okay, so that's 7 strategies down.
1 more to go.
All right, let's hear it.
The final strategy is all about diversifying funding sources.
Okay, making sure the school isn't putting all its eggs in one basket.
Right, exactly. And he suggests a few different ways to do this.
Okay.
One is to look for grant opportunities, not just at the federal level, but also at the regional and state levels.
So casting a wider net.
Exactly. And then he talks about establishing or strengthening school foundations to encourage philanthropy from individuals and local businesses.
So tapping into the generosity of the community.
Right. And he even suggests exploring grant funding from the private sector.
Interesting.
And then finally, he says it's really important to have contingency budgets
Okay.
so that if funding changes or there's an unexpected shortfall,
Yeah.
the school has a buffer.
So it's about being prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. And when you have multiple streams of funding coming in,
Yeah.
it creates a lot more stability and resilience.
It gives you more options and more flexibility.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
going to be so important in the coming years.
Yeah, as we navigate all of this uncertainty.
Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour of Dr. Knopf's 8 future-proof strategies.
It was a lot to take in.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but hopefully it gives you some ideas to think about.
Yeah, some good food for thought.
And remember, all of this is available in Dr. Knopf's blog post if you want to dig in deeper.
Absolutely. It's worth a read.
Okay, so now let's move on to the second area that Dr. Knopf emphasizes,
Okay.
which is the school's mission statement.
Right. Revisiting and maybe adjusting that.
Exactly. And he says that in times like these, when there's so much change happening,
Yeah.
it's really important to make sure that your mission statement is crystal clear
Makes sense.
and that it really reflects who you are as a school.
Yeah. And why parents should choose your school.
Exactly. And how you're committed to helping students succeed.
Right.
So it's about making sure that your mission statement is more than just words on a page.
Yeah. It needs to be something that everyone in the school community believes in.
And that guides their decisions.
Exactly. And Dr. Knopf actually lists a bunch of characteristics of
Yeah.
a really effective mission statement.
Okay, so let's go through those. So first of all, he says it should clearly explain why the school exists
Yeah.
and who it serves.
So like its purpose and its target audience.
Right, and then it should provide a brief description of the school's programs
Mm-hmm.
and what it offers.
So people can get a sense of what makes the school unique.
Exactly. And then it should clearly define what the school hopes students will learn
Yeah.
and how they'll develop.
So the desired outcomes.
Right. And he also says that the mission statement should be the guiding principle
Sure.
for everything the school does.
So all the big goals.
Yeah, and even the day-to-day interactions and decisions.
So it's like the compass that keeps the school on track.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that a really future-proofed mission statement
Okay.
should be clear and concise, using language that everyone can understand,
Right.
and that it should directly state the school's core purpose.
So no jargon or ambiguity.
Exactly. And then he says it should be purpose-driven
Mm-hmm.
with a focus on student learning, and that it should clearly articulate how the school is going to help students achieve their goals.
So it's not just about what the school is. It's about what the school does.
Right, exactly. And then he says it should be values-based,
Okay.
reflecting the beliefs and principles that are important to the whole school community.
So it's about more than just academics.
Right. It's about creating a certain kind of environment.
Yeah, a culture.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
he says it needs to be student-centered,
Hmm.
putting the well-being of the learners first.
So it's about the whole child.
Right, not just their test scores.
Exactly.
And he says it should be inclusive,
Okay.
representing the diverse perspectives of everyone in the school community.
So everyone feels like they belong.
Exactly. And then he says it needs to be actionable and measurable,
Okay.
meaning that you can actually use it to plan and make decisions,
Right.
and that you can track your progress towards your goals.
So it's not just a feel-good statement.
Exactly. It's a roadmap.
Yeah.
And then he says it should be inspirational, meaning that it should motivate and energize everyone in the school community.
So it's something that people can get excited about.
Exactly. And finally, he says it should be durable yet adaptable,
Okay.
meaning that it should stay relevant over time,
Yeah.
but that it should also be flexible enough to change with the times.
So it can evolve as the school's needs evolve.
Exactly. So it's
Mhm.
not set in stone,
Right.
but it's also not just a passing fad.
It's a living document.
Exactly. Okay, so that's a lot to think about.
Yes.
But the key takeaway here is that your mission statement
Yeah.
is really important.
It's the heart of the school.
Exactly. It's not just something that you put on your website and forget about.
Yeah.
It's something that should guide everything you do.
And especially now, with all these changes happening,
Mm-hmm.
it's more important than ever to have a strong mission statement.
Exactly. Okay, so that's the second area that Dr. Knopf talks about.
Okay.
Now let's move on to the third area, which is the public relations plan.
Right. Making sure the school's message is getting out there.
Exactly. And he's not just talking about publicity.
Okay.
He's talking about a strategic plan for communicating with the community,
Yeah.
building trust, and strengthening relationships.
So it's about more than just putting out press releases.
Right. It's about building those connections and showing the community why the school is valuable.
And I think what's really interesting about this is that a good PR plan can actually bring all of the other strategies together.
How so?
Well, if you're doing all this great work with evidence-based practices and community engagement and all that,
Yeah.
your PR plan can highlight those successes.
Right. It's like the megaphone.
Exactly.
That amplifies everything the school is doing.
And that can make a huge difference in terms of building support for the school.
Absolutely. Okay, so the summary goes on to list some of the key goals of a good PR plan.
Okay.
First of all, it's about increasing awareness of the school's achievements.
Yeah, letting people know what you're doing well.
Exactly, and showing the positive impact that the school is having on students and the community.
Right, because sometimes those positive stories don't get told.
Right, they get overshadowed by the negative stuff.
Exactly. So it's important to make sure those positive stories are being heard.
And then another goal is to build trust and confidence in the school, both in its methods and its leadership.
So that people feel like they can rely on the school?
Right. And then another goal is to increase parent and community involvement
Right.
so that people feel like they're part of the school community.
That sense of ownership again.
Exactly. And then another goal is to build partnerships with other organizations so that the school can leverage those resources and expertise.
That's a smart strategy.
And then finally, the PR plan should be focused on showcasing the school's results so that people can see that what they're doing is actually working.
Data-driven decision-making.
Exactly. And Dr. Norkmanoff also talks about the importance of targeting your message to different audiences.
Makes sense, because you wouldn't talk to parents the same way you talk to the school board.
Right, exactly. So he lists a bunch of different groups that the PR plan should address.
Okay, like who?
So there's current parents, people who live in the neighborhood around the school, members of the school board or governing body alumni of the school, local businesses and community organizations, government officials, media outlets, both traditional and online, and of course, prospective families.
So pretty much everyone who has a stake in the school.
Exactly. And the idea is that you need to tailor your message to resonate with each of those groups.
So it's about speaking their language.
Exactly. And the summary also gives some examples of the kinds of messages that schools should be highlighting.
Okay.
So, for example, you want to emphasize your commitment to using evidence-based practices.
Right.
You want to showcase student achievements.
Yeah.
Highlight any innovative approaches to teaching. Promote opportunities for community involvement.
Okay.
Underscore the expertise of your teachers.
Yeah.
Articulate the school's values and culture.
Right.
And focus on preparing students for the future.
So it's about painting a positive picture of the school.
Exactly, and showing all the great things that are happening.
And doing it in a way that resonates with different audiences.
Exactly. And ultimately, all of this comes down to communication.
Yeah.
Consistent, transparent, authentic communication.
Exactly.
And when you do that, you build trust, you build relationships, and you create a more positive and supportive environment for everyone.
It's a win-win.
Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about Dr. Knopf's 8 future-proof strategies. We've talked about the characteristics of a strong mission statement.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the importance of a strategic public relations plan.
A lot of ground covered.
Yeah, it was a lot, but hopefully it was helpful.
Definitely.
And I think Dr. Knopf's main message is really important.
It's just
that even though there are all these big changes happening, schools can not only survive, but thrive.
Yeah.
If they focus on their internal strengths and build strong relationships with their communities.
That's a powerful message.
And it's a hopeful message.
Yeah.
Because it means that we're not just at the mercy of these external forces.
Right.
We can actually take control of our own destiny.
Exactly. And I think that's something that all educators need to hear right now.
Absolutely. Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Okay.
Of those 8 future-proof strategies that we talked about, which one resonates most strongly with you? And what's one small step that you could take today to start implementing that strategy in your own work?
That's a good challenge.
Yeah. And maybe as you're thinking about that, you could also take a look at your organization's mission statement and see if it needs any tweaking.
That's a great idea.
Or maybe you could brainstorm some ways to strengthen your connections with the community.
It's all about taking those small steps.
Exactly. And over time, those small steps can lead to big changes. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.